Zaid Jilani was on Rising on the Hill with Krystal and Saagar and Enjeti this morning to discuss a New York Times piece that was released and was published and it was on the topic of race and power. And I just wanted to talk about why I think that Krystal and Zed had the wrong take here. So first and foremost, let me just tell you, I love Crystal Ball. I really enjoyed the show Rising. I think Sagar's, a genuine right winger who's sincere, at least in his, as populist as a right winger could be. And I do appreciate the show, and I really have the utmost respect for Crystal Ball. And so Zaid Jilani, he frustrates me sometimes on certain issues, particularly issues around race. He tends to frustrate me. But I, still consider him a credible journalist and such. And so I do want to address what he says here and sort of address their take on this. But I'm going to play this clip of Zaid Jilani's appearance on Rising this morning, and then we'll talk a little bit about that on the other side.
A review of the most powerful people in America across industries was published by the New York Times. Their findings show that out of the identified 922 of the most powerful people in America, according to them, 180 are Black, Hispanic, Asian, or a person of color, self-identifying.
The review includes an interactive map that highlights people of color in power without including each person's identified race or ethnicity. So in one case, the Times highlights Rashida Tlaib, who is Palestinian, as a person of color, but then excludes Alex Azar, who is Lebanese. So some of these things didn't make a lot of sense. Friend of the show and journalist Zaid Jilani joins us to weigh in on the methodology used by the Times and kind of overall this approach. Zaid, great to see you.
Good to see you, Zaid.
Good to be here.
All right, so what did you make of this approach that they took and some of those discrepancies that you and others pointed out?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because anytime that you are constructing something like this where you're identifying other people rather than having them identify themselves, you're going to get into dicey areas where I think there's areas of disagreement. So, for instance, not only was Alex Azar listed as white when he comes from a Lebanese background, I think Justin Amash may have been listed as white. Chris Sununu, who's Palestinian, I think was listed as white. Whereas other people of Palestinian descent were not listed as white. And it's curious because that's actually like a category that's evolved in the census taking. So Arab Americans often were listed as Caucasian or as white, although many people who are Arab American today are petitioning kind of their own category in the census. So it kind of shows how creating these categories in and of itself is fairly fraught because they're socially constructed, right? So people change how they identify over time. Society, it's like a negotiation between the people and society. Even Kamala Harris's mother, if you look at Kamala Harris's birth certificate, her mother, who's from India, lists herself as Caucasian, right? Which we'd be like, that's bizarre. Like we don't consider people from the Indian subcontinent to be white. But
right.
In the time that she was born, that was a convention they were using. So it's fraught in and of itself. And it's funny that they think they can make this delineation in a kind of static way that people aren't going to contest because race is a very fluid concept.
So that was Zaid Jilani on Rising discussing a New York Times article that came out that was published on race and power. And I just wanted to talk about what I think they got wrong in that segment. And again, I feel bad because I know I haven't had a chance to cover a lot of Krystal and these folks. And so it might sound like I am, right out of the gate, like I am against Krystal Ball here, but she is a great leftist who I find myself quite, oftentimes, very closely aligned with her politically. And so she was also a great friend to Michael Brooks and oftentimes did work with him that I thought was great work that she was doing there as well. So just got to keep on hammering that point home that, listen, I love Krystal. I think that she's great, but I think that she got it wrong here. And I just want to talk about that. So what I think they got wrong. In order to highlight that, I just got to show off. I got to highlight sort of the key people that they honed in on there, right? And so let me just sort of, the issue that I think that they got wrong, let me just say in advance, is that I think that they're conflating race and ethnicity / nationality. And I think that it's a mistake that is made whenever those things are conflated. So let me show you the people who they refer to specifically, because they name very specific names when they try to make their case here. And I can only base my judgment off of what they highlighted as what they took issue with. So they referred to, how can the fact that one Palestinian was referred to as a person of color, but another Palestinian was referred to as being white. Or how was a Palestinian, Rashida Tlaib, identified as a person of color, but they said, Alex Azar, who is Lebanese, was identified as being white by the New York Times. And they said, the New York Times clearly has gotten it wrong. Okay, well, you know what? Let's take a look at these people, and then I'm gonna again. I'll give my take here, but let me take you through just a few pictures of a few of them here. So let's start with Rashida Tlaib first. And so for anyone that's not familiar with Rashida Tlaib, let's take a look. I'm literally in all of these examples, what I'm going to do is I've Googled their name and done an image search on each of their names. So I'm not trying to be biased in the photos that I selected. This isn't some personally self-selected group of photos. I'm showing you the Google image search results for just their name. So first up is Rashida Tlaib. This here is the first picture that you see for Rashida Tlaib is this one here. I'm just going to flip through a bunch and give you a general feel for what Rashida Tlaib looks like. Now, again, I'm just flipping through here. Even when she's in images where she's paler, I'll show you, the images when her skin looks paler. And I'll tell you, I look at Rashida Tlaib and you just sort of, is that a white woman to you, or is that a woman of color? And I think just based on her look, to me, I will say she looks like a woman of color to me. She looks like a person of color. She does not look like what I would say is a what I would describe as a white woman. And so she looks to be a person of color to me. And her name is Rashida Tlaib also. So they said, Rashida Tlaib, how could Rashida Tlaib, a Palestinian woman, be defined as a woman of color, but Alex Azar, who is Lebanese man, be called white by the New York Times? And they took issue with that. That was the only example that Krystal Ball pointed to was Rashida Tlaib versus Alex Azar. So let's take a look at Alex Azar now, and we will compare. All right. I mean, you tell me, you tell me. These are literally the first images I'm pulling up. I'm just flipping through a bunch of images here so you can see that I'm not like self-selecting here or anything like that. You tell me, what is this person? Is this a white guy? When you look at him, when the cops look at this guy, do they see a person of color? Or do they see a white guy here? What do you see? Do you see a person of color here? Do you think that cops are looking at this guy saying, oh, this is clearly an Arabic man here, All right. So this is Alex Azar, who they referred to. They also referred to two other people, at least. So they said Zaid Jilani also referred to Krystal and Justin Amash. So he referred to Justin Amash next. Let's take a look at Justin Amash here. This is Justin Amash. All right. You tell me, is this a man of color? Is this a brown man? Is this a man of color, or is this a white man? I mean, it's a white ass white man right here. All right, folks. Let me spoiler alert. All right. Spoiler alert. So I'm sorry, but what? I mean, seriously, this is who you. Okay. All right. Next up, they said Krystal, right? Wow. I mean, man of color here, folks. You tell me, is this a person of color here? Or is this comparable to Rashida Tlaib here? Is this somebody who's lived their life? Krystal here. Do we think that Krystal has lived his life as a man of color? Seriously? That's how he's had to navigate the world? That's how he's had to navigate the criminal justice system in the United States, the employment system in the United States? Do you think he navigates that as a man of color? You tell me. You tell me. All right. So the issue here is that I think that they're conflating nationality and ethnicity with race, and it bothers me as a Black person in America. Yeah, it bothers me because I don't. You can't say the nationality of person. Oh, how can one Palestinian be a person of color and another Palestinian be considered white? That's like asking, how can one Canadian be considered a person of color and another Canadian be considered white? What the hell? How can one American be considered, a person of color and another American be considered white? Your nationality does not determine your race. I'm sorry. There are African people. How can one African person be considered white? South Africans, there are plenty of white South Africans, right? We have a whole issue down there in South Africa because of white South Africans, right? And so we have white Africans, you can, just because you're from Africa doesn't mean you're black, right? That's not what that means. That's not automatic, right? Your nationality, your ethnicity does not determine your race automatically, right? So, in Jamaica, we have white Jamaicans, we have Chinese Jamaicans, we have Indian Jamaicans, and to say you're Jamaican doesn't tell me what your skin color is. It doesn't tell me how you have to navigate, the social construct of race. So, and that's not to say that there aren't certain, to be clear, there are certain, right, like facial features that get associated with race as well, right? So we have to be careful with that too. Of course, there are things like having like a thinner nose are seen as like more Eurocentric, whiter. That's associated, like having a white nose versus like a broader nose would be a black nose, right? So you can have like a thinner nose. Blue eyes are associated with whiteness, right? So if you have blue eyes, it's sort of a Eurocentric white. It's associated with whiteness, which it's valued more in society. It's just considered more beautiful, more the beauty standards are set around those features. Straighter hair, that's considered white, right? By like that's a feature that's associated with whiteness versus kinky curly hair. So there are certainly certain features beyond just skin color that do certainly get associated with race, and we should be clear on that, and that's important to know. But skin color should be the number one factor when we're talking about race. I mean, race is literally the color. That's what the construct is the color of your skin. And I think that they completely missed the point here to say like, oh, the New York Times was somehow wrong to call Rashida Tlaib a woman of color, but to call Justin Amash and Alex Azar and Chris Sununu white. Like, come on, they are white. Who are we kidding? When the cops stop them in the streets, when they drive past the cops aren't looking at them like, oh, that's a brown man, oh, that's a brown, that's a person of color there. That's a black person. Like, no chance in hell. Like Rashida Tlaib, you see her, you're like, oh, she ain't white. She ain't white. That's obvious to me, at least. And that's me. And listen, I'm a black American. I was raised by, my mother is white, my mother's Italian, my father's Jamaican. I've experienced race in America. I've experienced race in Jamaica, and I understand colorism. Colorism exists where racism doesn't exist. Colorism often exists where lighter skinned people are often given favorable treatment over darker skinned people. They're considered more attractive, lighter skinned people, and they always talk about like mixed people. And I'm, people will call me like biracial. I don't necessarily believe in the concept of like biracial, because I think your race is what skin color you have to move around the world in, and you only get one of those. And when the police stop me, or the taxi driver pulls up, or the banker or the landlord sees me, like, they don't see my white mom, they see my black skin color, and that's how I get treated. That's how I get treated by cops. I get treated as black. I've had to my name is Kamali. My name's Kamali Rose. Like, you see my name on a job application, you're associating it with blackness, Africanness, blackness right out of the gate. Kamali, either African or quote unquote Middle Eastern, name Kamal, or my actual name derives from Africa, from Mozambique, Kamali, wind spirit. And so there's no getting around that. I've had to navigate through this world as a black man in America. I've had to that's how, when everybody sees me, for me, race, it's sort of, it often is, it's how people perceive you in an instant, right? Because that's how race actually gets it's how it gets executed. It's how it gets observed in society, right? Is in a moment, in a snap decision, what does somebody, what are the assumptions someone makes about you? What are their, and their immediate impression of you? Because that often determines how they're going to respond to you, how they're going to treat you. And so, for me, race can be, it's pretty much as, you look at somebody and you kind of know, right? Now, of course, there are cases around the edge and there's a blur there. You can talk about folks like Sean King and there are certainly very light, folks that identify as being Black. I mean, we have other issues, going on in the news right now. Jessica Krug, Rachel Dolezal, folks like that have, white women claiming that they, claiming Blackness and when they haven't had to exist that way, on a day-to-day basis for the majority of their lives, and also caricaturing Blackness in the same breath, right? Like Jessica Krug wasn't just pretending to be Black. She was pretending to be this twisted caricature of a Black person, like angry and loud, and it's just all these sort of like if you don't check those things off, you're not technically Black enough, and so we just got to be really careful about what we talk about when we talk about like Blackness. It really is just, what is your skin color? And that's what it's about. Some people will say, I've got a friend who gets called, says he's acting white all the time, and the dude's, you've seen Kwame, or Kwame's on the show sometime, Race Fist Media. You've seen Kwame before. Kwame's a Black man, but he gets called white because he's into nerdy stuff, and he talks he doesn't speak AAVE necessarily all the time, but he does. He has a mix of it, but it's just he's an educated person, and so being too educated isn't Black enough to in not in Black people's mind per se, but like the caricature that a lot of like white people have about Black people. And so you sort of have to, if you don't fit that caricature, then you are sort of also seen as like not really Black, when the reality is like, no, your Blackness is just, how are you, what's that skin color that you have typically, skin color and features, and how do people view you? What is their perception of you? Because if you are white passing, it's not the same. It's just not, you're not going to have the same experience, same lived experience as a dark skinned person who has to travel through this society. And we have to recognize that. And I've not been perfect on this issues of colorism my whole life, and sort of, this idea of like being too favorable about my mixed raceness and the sort of, what's attractive about that. But I do think that Krystal and Zaid Jilani are wrong here, and that what they're doing is conflating race and nationality / ethnicity, and they're wrong on it. And so I do, now mind you, the New York Times, who happens to be right on this, I think that their motive behind this is probably, the neoliberal motive of essentially rainbow capitalism, in the idea of like creating a rainbow capitalism, diversifying the police, diversify your oppressors kind of mentality. Like, oh, we just need more wealthy Black people and then everything's fair. As long as we have the, neoliberals essentially want the right mix of wealth and equality. Like they want the right the right like diversal mix of inequality, right? They just want to make sure they're fine with the inequality. They just want to make sure the proportionately that there's enough Black people, proportional representation for Black, Indigenous people in the ruling class. That's it. Like that's their whole goal of these, in the framing behind these stories. So I'm not out here like championing the New York Times as like some arbiter of Blackness or anything like that. I just think they happen to get it right on this issue, and that they actually were correct in identifying these folks, and not leaving it up, too much leaving it up to self-identification of like, it's like, no, wait, like you can kind of determine someone's race, because that's how race is determined in our society. It's not how you identify yourself. It's not what you get to go put out there to the world. It's literally how the world sees you. That's what your race is how the world sees you. And that's unfortunately how race is, that's how the construct of race has operated in my life, and how I've had to, navigate that. And so, yes, I have a white mother, and have the experience of seeing how she is treated, and how she gets treated differently when, she's around. She has our Black kids, when they realize that it's her children that she's with. And then also, just the difference of how she gets treated and all the advantages that she's had in life versus, and, you know, the privilege, that's sort of ancestral privilege that gets passed down, and the advantages of that, and recognizing that when I talk about issues of Blackness and these things, but also recognizing that, yes, like, you know, this is how I travel through the world. Like, you know, those lights are kind of blinging, but you can see how I travel through this world. And it's not, my mother's whiteness doesn't come into play when the cops see me, or when the landlords see me, or anything like that, or when the employers see my resume and it's Kamali Rose, and, you know, they got all their assumptions that come into play there. So I just wanted to touch on that and call that out, because I watched The Rising regularly, and I saw that segment and was just like, no, that is wrong. They are wrong. Like, what, you just named a bunch. How is Rashida Tlaib a woman of color and these people are white? Well, look at them. What the hell? Like, what do you see? Because I see a whole bunch of white dudes. Everyone they named was a white dude that I saw. They're all white. And I don't care how they identify, because I know how the world identifies them. I know what's gotten them their status in life. And it's being able to use that whiteness to their advantage. Thanks for watching Radical Democracy Podcast. I'm your host, Kamali Rose. Please like and share this video, subscribe to the channel, and if it doesn't bother you, hit that bell below to receive notifications whenever we go live or launch a new video. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you can afford it, do me a huge favor and head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/radicaldemocracy. and throw me a few bucks. Whatever you can afford, it goes a long way, and I will greatly appreciate it. It helps the channel to continue to exist and to grow, and I really appreciate the support. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon. All right. Peace. All right, that was a good one. That one's it.